All right, I'm joined now by Republican Senator Rand Paul of Kentucky. Senator Paul, let me start right there. So we heard from Steve Witkoff. I know you've raised concerns about this gift of this Qatari jet. He says the Qataris are giving it simply because they've decided to donate something because of all the wonderful things that we've done for them in the past. Do you buy that the Qataris don't expect anything in return for a $400 million gift?
I guess, first of all, I think my fear is that it detracts from a largely successful trip where the president is talking about opening up and doing more trade with the Middle East, which is a good thing, particularly amidst all the protectionism and directing away from trade that we've had going on. I would say that we sell more arms than any other country in the world. We are the largest arms merchant in the entire world, and a lot of those arms go to Gulf sheikdoms and monarchies like the Qataris. Those decisions are made by the executive branch. We have a veto power in Congress, and I've been part of vetoing or trying to veto arms before to Qatar as well as to Saudi Arabia over human rights abuses. So could it color the perception of the administration if they have a $400 million plane to be more in favor of these things? Perhaps. It at least gives the appearance of a conflict of interest. I don't think it's worth the headache, and I think it's detracting from a largely successful trip to the Middle East, which includes a lot of good things as far as expanding trade.
He also said it's a perfectly legal transaction. Do you see it that way? I know you raised questions about the emoluments clause.
I think it sort of depends on how the transaction is set up. Is there a possibility that, could they donate it back to Boeing and Boeing sells it to us? There's a lot of ways this could be arranged. But I think what set up signals that people were concerned about was that it was going to be temporarily part of the government and then it was going to the president's library when the president retires. So I think all of those things could be fixed, could be corrected. There probably is a perfectly legal way, but right now it's raised more questions than I think it's worth.
Okay, Senator, let me turn to tariffs. The president also announced a temporary reduction to those big China tariffs, although there's still 30% tariffs on goods coming in from China as he tries to negotiate a new deal. Walmart has warned that this will result in higher prices. What's your assessment?
Well, tariffs are taxes, and when you put a tax on a business, it's always passed through as a cost, so there will be higher prices. And I think this is what's important to know. People talk about, oh, this is America versus China. The U.S. doesn't trade with China. You trade with Walmart, or you trade with Target, or you trade with Amazon. Americans go in and buy a product. Now, it might come from China, but think about it this way. Think if the entire trade with China was all TVs. 1 million people go to Walmart, they all buy a TV, they like the quality, they like the price, and it happened to come from China. But then you draw a circle around China and the U.S. and you say, oh my goodness, it's a trade deficit. We buy all of our TVs from over there. But each individual transaction, each individual who bought a TV was happy. But how can you draw a circle around 1 million happy people and say they all got ripped off? So there's an economic fallacy here. And the fallacy is that trade deficits actually mean anything. They're an artificial accounting. The only trade that means anything is the individual who buys something. That's the only real trade. And that, by very definition, if it's voluntary, is mutually beneficial or the trade doesn't occur.
So, yeah, I want to play something that President Trump said just recently, specifically talking about our trade deficit with Canada. Take a listen.
Why are we subsidizing Canada $200 billion a year, or whatever the number might be? It's a very substantial number. And it's hard for the American taxpayer to say, gee whiz, we love doing that.
So the actual trade deficit with Canada is actually a little less than or quite a bit less than $100 billion. But even so, is a trade deficit subsidizing Canada?
No, they're really not related at all. What happens if we trade with another country because they have less expensive goods is we become richer. You also have more money that you can spend. So let's say you're an average American and you shop at Walmart. You save about $4,000 or $5,000 a year because you're able to purchase goods that are imported from other countries. What do you do with that? I don't know. Maybe you go to Disney World. Maybe you go to Dollywood. You spend a lot of it in America. Maybe you get somebody to cut your grass. There's all kinds of things that happens to that extra money, but you are richer because you've gotten a product at a lower cost. And this is what the marketplace does. It drives prices down and it pushes efficiency, but it isn't one country against another. All of that is an artificial accounting. We've had a trade deficit with China ever since 1976. And yet we got richer and they got richer. This is the other fallacy they put forward. They say, oh, the middle class is being hollowed out. If you look at the middle class over 70 years, the middle class is about the same as it was 70 years ago. The one segment of our economy that has grown is those making over $100,000 a year, and that has tripled. So most of the middle class, if the middle class shrunk at all, actually went to an upper class. If you say upper class begins at $100,000. So most of this is just fallacy. We have gotten rich, rich, rich off of trade, all Americans, and it is lifting all boats, and we are richer than we have ever been in any time in our history. But it's not easy to convince people of that because there are short-term problems where you have inflation, like during the last 4 years, where the middle class actually did lose purchasing power and did get poorer. But if you look at it in the long term, it's not trade causing this. The thing that makes us poorer, if anything, would be inflation and the general rise of prices from inflation.
And before you go, there are several lawsuits challenging these tariffs. The Constitution clearly gives Congress the power to impose taxes, to impose duties. What is are these tariffs legal? Do you think do you think they'll get knocked down? And will Congress, as you suggested, will Congress grow a spine and assert its control over taxation?
I think a strict interpretation of the Constitution says that taxes originate in Congress, and more specifically, taxes originate in the House. They have to start in the House first before they come to the Senate. Now, we do have a long history, though, of both parties abdicating their responsibility on tariffs and granting power to Congress, which brings up another constitutional question. Can Congress delegate powers given to it under the Constitution to the president? In the past, the court has allowed these things, but I think it'll be an interesting thing because most tariffs in our history have been passed by Congress. We've never had widespread tariffs that have been done by fiat, by a president, and I object to that.
All right. Senator Rand Paul, thank you for joining us this morning.